Hey, church, I hope you're doing well. So, I want for us to remember a movie from a number of years ago. It's been over 20 at this point, not quite as far back as, the phones we talked about with no caller ID and attached to the wall and all of that stuff, but still go back in your mind a little bit to the movie The Rookie. Do you remember that one? It came out in 2002, starred Dennis Quaid. Well, just in case you didn't see it, Dennis Quaid plays Jim Morris, an actual person, an actual living, breathing human being. This movie's based on a true story. The story of Jim Morris and his journey to be a rookie in the Major League Baseball. Now, a couple things that I'll share with you about Jim. One, he has a really cool last name, Morris, just like mine, but I don't think we're any relation. So, cool last name, but I don't know the guy. The other thing I'll say is that Jim was created, it seemed, to play baseball. He just had a love and a passion and a heart for baseball. Even as a young kid, that's all he wanted to do. Baseball, baseball, baseball. Any chance he had, he was outside throwing pitch after pitch after pitch. And he had this dream, this huge dream that one day he would be a professional baseball player. Of course, people in his story, his dad in particular, didn't encourage that dream. They thought he shouldn't do that that's not something that he could achieve. Regardless, Jim thought, I'm going to put in the work. I want to be a baseball player. Well, as he grew, he was fortunate that he was talented at baseball. He had not only the dream, but he had the ability, and he developed quite the arm. And so when he got into his 20s, it looked like that dream might come true. He was pitching well, he was getting opportunities, he thought he was on the cusp of breaking into the Major League Baseball, of being a pitcher. And then he hurt his shoulder. He had some major shoulder injury, so much so that it was one of those, baseball ending type of things. And his dream died. His calling to be a baseball player died. Life continued. He became a teacher. He still liked baseball. He still poured into baseball. In fact, he became the high school baseball coach. But it seemed like he had passed that time where playing baseball was going to be an option. Now, one day, as he was coaching the team, roles kind of reversed. See, he had been telling his team about dreaming big, about pursuing the championship, about making the playoffs, about not settling for less and going for things that were important for him. And his team, in turn, said, well, yeah, we get it, but what about you, coach? Doesn't seem like you're putting into practice the things that you were saying. Don't you have some big dream? Don't you want to be a professional baseball player? Are you going after that? Are you pursuing that thing that's before you that you're so passionate about? He makes the team a deal. Jim says to them, well, if you go after your dream and you make the playoffs or whatever it was that he wanted them to make, then I'll go after mine and I'll try out to be a pitcher. All the while thinking, I'm past my prime, I'm past the season, there's no way that I'll make it. There's no way that I can do it at this point. That opportunity has passed. The team makes the playoffs or the championship or whatever they're going after. Jim tries out, and it turns out he still has the goods. He's throwing 98-mile-per-hour fastballs consistently, and he's drafted. He's picked up. He goes into the minor leagues. Next thing you know, he's bumped up a level in the minor leagues. And lo and behold, before too long, he's called up to the big show, to the dance. He gets to pitch in Major League Baseball. And he has a couple of years where he gets to live out that dream as a Major League pitcher. Even though he thought that dream was over, that his chance had passed, that he was far too old to do that, Jim Morris was able to, and he became a rookie at the age of 35. Now, the movie does a much better job telling the story, and if you'd liked a good nice little feel-good movie. That's one that you can try out. But that's not really why I bring it up. And it's not really to just say, well, you all can go play Major League Baseball if that's your dream and your passion. Because frankly, that possibility isn't realistic for most people. He happened to have a cannon of an arm and could throw 98-mile-per-hour pitches. You might love baseball and dream of doing that, but you throw a 5-mile-per-hour, cupcake, you're not getting in. No matter how much you dream, no matter how young you are, and no matter how old you get, some dreams just aren't realistic. But what if your dream, what if your calling, what if your passion, what if that thing that you are considering to do is actually a calling from God? What happens when you receive that call past your prime? Past the window that you think is the time that you could have been effective in that area? What happens if you receive that call later on in life when you were looking for it earlier and you think that you missed your chance, your opportunity? That's the story that we're looking at today as we continue in this series where we're considering people who have responded to God. And how have they responded to God? We're looking at these 6 people who have responded by saying hineni. That's the Hebrew word for here I am, which has with it this connotation, this implication that you surrender, that all that you have is God's. That you're saying to God, here I am, whatever you want, wherever you want, whenever you want, however you want. I am yours. You lead, I will follow. You provide, I will trust. I am yours. Hineni, here I am. So far, we've looked at 2 people who have uttered that phrase, who have responded to God in that way. The first was Abraham. His response came at a season in his life when things were going pretty well. Isaac had been born miraculously. God had promised him more descendants than the stars in the sky, more than the grains of sand on the earth, to be his God and for nations to be blessed through Abraham. And while he was going about life and things were going well, God called him and he responded, hineni, whatever you want. And God said, well, will you offer me everything? Am I really your God? Will you serve me and trust me and love me even more than you love Isaac? And Abraham responded in faith, trusting God, offering God his everything, and believing that God would fulfill the promise to him in spite of the way the circumstance looked. Abraham, when life was going well, responded hineni and then went into a season of testing. He was the first we looked at. And then we talked about how Abraham had Isaac and Isaac had Jacob, and Jacob was the next person to respond hineni. Jacob, you remember, was in the middle of a mess. Family life was not that good. His brother was mad at him, wanted to kill him. His father-in-law was cheating him and doing a little switcheroo with him. When he was expecting one wife, he got another. And then the 2 wives were fighting with each other and sons and all of this mess. Jacob was in the middle of the mess when God called, and Jacob responded, hineni, I'll go where you send me. Lead and I will follow. And he went from what was seemingly one mess to what could have been another mess. From the middle of one sticky situation to what certainly appeared to be another. And yet Jacob offered himself to God. Here I am, whatever you want. Now from Jacob to Moses, who is the next person that we'll look at today, it's a little bit of a journey, but it's helpful for us to kind of remember these things, to have in mind this history and this story, that we tell this story of God as we remember Moses, to help us better understand his calling and his response. Abraham had Isaac, who had Jacob, and you remember Jacob had a number of sons. He had 12, in fact, but just like his dad Isaac had his favorite, which happened to be Esau, not Jacob, but just like his dad had his favorite, Jacob had his favorite son as well, and that was Joseph. So Jacob gave Joseph preferential treatment. Jacob favored Joseph because he was the oldest born of the wife that he loved the most, Rachel. And so Jacob blessed him and looked after him and provided for him, gave him this coat of many colors, much like my hoodie, except for I imagine even more extravagant and expensive. Jacob favored his son Joseph. And you know that if you have siblings, when one gets preferential treatment, when one is favored, that causes the other ones to have some issue, to maybe build up some jealousy, to have problems with one another. And that was the case in this family. The other sons of Jacob, who I should also mention is also called Israel. God had met Jacob in his journey following him on his way back to the promised land, to the land of Abraham and Isaac. God had met Jacob there and said, your name no longer will be Jacob, but we'll call you Israel. So Israel's favorite son, Joseph, had conflict with his other sons because, they were jealous. And then added to that fact, Joseph was given dreams. That in and of itself isn't necessarily a problem. In fact, it was a good thing. God was the one that gave him dreams, but Joseph didn't really know how to handle that with his brothers. He didn't really know how to be discreet with his dreams. Instead, he said, hey, you guys, guess what? Not only do I have this fancy coat, this nice jacket, but I'm going to rule over you. You all will bow down before me. He was a younger brother telling this to his older siblings. They didn't respond well. They didn't say, oh yeah, that's great, Joseph. I'm looking forward to that day. They said, this dreamer has to go. And so his brothers contemplated how to get rid of the dreamer, Joseph, who was their father Israel's favorite. One of the options was to kill him. We kill him, we say that he was eaten by a wild animal, and problem solved. Fortunately, they went a different route, and they thought, why kill him if we can make money on him? So they sold him to slavery, and Joseph left the promised land and went to Egypt as a slave. So Israel, or Jacob, depending on how you want to refer to him, Israel's favorite son, Joseph, was sold as a slave to Egypt. Meanwhile, his other sons told him, your son is dead. He is no more. And Jacob was grieving. Time passes, and Joseph remains faithful to God. Even though he was mistreated, he trusts that God will provide in this land of Egypt. And so he serves his master Potiphar faithfully. And he's blessed in his service. Everything he touches, everything he does, every place he goes, the Lord just pours out his favor upon Joseph and his efforts. And so Potiphar puts him in charge of everything. And eventually he catches attention of different people, in particular Potiphar's wife. She checks out Joseph and thinks, I see why your dad favors you. You're a fine-looking young man. The Lord blesses everything you touch. How about you and I, we get together? And she didn't mean that in a positive, wholly appropriate way. She meant that in a inappropriate, have an affair against your husband kind of way. Joseph wisely and thankfully said, no, ma'am, that is not for me. That would dishonor God and your husband. I'm not going to do that. And when she realized that he was a man of character and she knew that she wasn't, she decided, well, I got to get rid of this guy. And she accused him of being inappropriate towards her, of making advances towards her. And so Potiphar had to throw him in jail. He couldn't have him there hitting on his wife, and so off to jail Joseph went. Still not guilty of anything other than being faithful to God and maybe sharing some dreams when he shouldn't have and receiving some gifts that made other people jealous. Regardless, in jail, Joseph was faithful. Joseph was obedient. Joseph honored God, and God blessed him, even in that place, so that everything that he touched flourished, so that he was put in charge of things in jails, and so that even people would come to him with problems. a couple of his cellmates or people in the jail as well said, you know, Joseph, we've been having some dreams. I wonder if you can tell us what they mean. Joseph said, well, I don't know that I can, but God certainly can. Let me talk to God. I'll get back to you. And he told him what the dreams meant. And then eventually those dreams came true. And then after years of Joseph sitting in jail, Pharaoh had a dream. And one of the people who had talked to Joseph before happened to be in Pharaoh's court and said, you know, this is bad, but I remember a young Israelite, a descendant of Israel, a young Hebrew person, a son of Jacob, who was in jail, who happened to know how to interpret dreams. Why don't you ask him, Pharaoh? Pharaoh pulls Joseph out of jail. Pharaoh says, how about it? Can you tell me what these dreams mean? And Joseph says, well, I don't know that I can, but God can. Let me ask God. And he tells him, Egypt and all the surrounding land will have 7 years of plenty, grain upon grain upon grain upon grain, stack upon stack upon stack upon stacks. And then there will be 7 years of famine, so bad that they'll forget the years of plenty, that people will be starving. And so what you need to do, Pharaoh, is put somebody wise in charge who will build up your storehouses, who will save all of this plenty so that when the famine comes, you'll have enough to get through. Pharaoh's like, good plan, good interpretation. Sounds like God is with you. You demand. Joseph gets put in charge of Egypt. Eventually, what he said the dreams meant comes to be the case because God had said it. And all of the people in all of the land were hungry, including Israel and his descendants, including Jacob and his sons and their families. They were all hungry. And as they were hungry, they heard, you know, there's grain in Egypt. There's food in Egypt. And they traveled there. And wouldn't you know it, there's Joseph. They don't recognize him. They don't expect him, obviously, because he's ruling. He's second in command over all of Egypt. He's in a position of authority, of power. He's ruling over Egypt, and they all bow before him. Eventually, Joseph says, you know, I forgive you for what you did. Why don't you all come and move to Egypt? And so they did. Israel, Jacob, and his whole family, all of his sons, all of their wives, all of their sons and daughters and relatives and flocks and herds and on, they all move to Egypt. And they live in Egypt, and they do well. And God blesses them and prospers them, and they multiply some more, and they multiply some more. And eventually, the Israelites are numerous after years and years. And the Egyptians are looking at these people going, you know, we might have a problem. There's too many of these Israelites around. And enough time had passed that they forgot about Joseph. They forgot about the famine. They forgot about the plenty. They forgot about the rule of Joseph. And all they saw were these Israelites causing problems. And so they did what people sometimes do. They pushed them down. They said, you know, we need to take control over you. And they captured them and enslaved them. So the Egyptians ruled over the Israelites. And the Israelites found themselves in Egypt in slavery, in bondage, in persecution. So much so that at a certain point, Pharaoh decided, you know, they're just multiplying too much. We need to put a stop to this. We need to quit this happening. The Israelites are becoming too numerous. One day they'll take us over. And so Pharaoh said to the midwives, you need to kill all the babies that are born. If an Israelite has a baby, chuck them into the river. Make sure they don't live. And into that, after 400 years in Egypt, comes Moses. Moses, born at a time where the Israelites are being persecuted, these descendants of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, where they're being persecuted, where they're enslaved, where they're being killed just for being born, where they're at the lowest of the low of society, in captivity, in hardship and suffering, Moses is born. And when Moses is born, he's a special child. His mom says, I can't kill this baby. And she hides him for as long as she can, and then she puts him in a basket in the river to protect him when she can no longer hide him, hoping that God will just provide and take care of him. And God does. The daughter of Pharaoh, the daughter of the ruler of all, sees this baby and says, I'll take him in to be my own. Moses will grow up in Pharaoh's house. He'll learn all the customs of the Egyptians. But even in the midst of the riches and the splendor and the glory of Egypt at that time, in all of the worldly wealth, Moses wants to play baseball. Okay, so it's not that he wants to play baseball, but he wants to help his people. He knows that he's an Israelite too, even though he had been spared and treated well. He wants to help his people, and he grows up with that call, that sense, that understanding that God might use him to help the people that are enslaved, that are persecuted, that are here in Egypt away from the promised land and are undergoing all this hardship and heartbreak. Moses wants to help with them. And so when he grows up, he's talented, he's wealthy, he knows things, and he sees an Egyptian person mistreating an Israelite, and he thinks, now's the time. I've hit my prime. It's time for me to put this desire into action. And so he goes out to that Egyptian and he kills him. He kills him because he's mistreating an Israelite. He thinks that he's helping his people to get free from their persecution, from their hardship, from their slavery. The next day, or I think it's the next day, but after that, he sees a couple Israelites fighting. And he goes to them and he says, brothers, why are you fighting each other? Don't you know that this isn't helpful? We're persecuted by the Egyptians. We shouldn't be against each other. We should be against them. And they look to him and say, who are you? What, are you going to kill me like you killed that Egyptian? And Moses goes, ooh, that a problem. If they know that, other people know that, and Pharaoh will know that, and then he'll want to kill me because I killed an Egyptian. And so Moses flees, and he goes to the desert, seemingly thinking that his calling is gone, that he has no chance to help his people. And for 40 years, he's in the wilderness, raising a family, tending sheep, watching his life go by, knowing that he missed his chance to help the people in captivity, the people that he loved, be free. And into that story of having had a promised land and the people going to Egypt and the Egyptians forgetting about them and enslaving them and putting them in captivity and killing babies, and Moses wanting to help, and then helping in the wrong way, taking matters into his own hands, killing an Egyptian, going into the wilderness, into the desert for 40 years. Into that story, we hear the call of God. And it comes in Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. I really like this story. The bush that's burning, but it's not burning. A bush that's on fire, but it's not being consumed. A bush that is burning, but it's not burning up. And I love that Moses sees it and recognizes it and goes over to it and says, yo, what is the deal? I mean, that's another benefit of, perhaps that is a benefit of not having a cell phone or tablet. I mean, although they have many modern features that are wonderful. Moses didn't have his face shoved in one, and when a bush was burning, but it wasn't burning, he was like, hey, isn't that something different? Maybe I'll go and check that out. And I won't spend a ton of time here, but it's a great story, and God can continue to speak to us through it. I'll go over and see the strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. And when the Lord saw he had gone over to look, there's a little more there. When the Lord saw that Moses was paying attention, when the Lord saw that Moses had gone to look, and we might ask the question, well, how many times is God doing something and we don't go over to look and then God doesn't speak? It's another path that we might take with this story. But when the Lord saw that Moses went over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. When he saw that Moses was paying attention, he called out his name, Moses, Moses. And how does Moses respond? Verse 4, the second part of it said, and Moses said, hineni, here I am. I'm yours. I surrender. Whatever you want, wherever you want, whenever you want. Here I am, an old shepherd tending the sheep at the end of this plain on the mountain called God, by a bush that's burning, but it isn't burning. Here I am, God. Anything you want. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I am concerned about their suffering. I've seen what's happening. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, to bring them up out of the land into a land that is good and spacious, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring out the people, to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. God says, I've seen what's happened. I know this is something that was on your heart, part of what you felt called to do. I put that desire in your heart, and I've seen my people suffer. And now I want you, Moses, to go and help. And Moses was a little bit reluctant, backtracked on that hineni just a bit. He was like, hey, God, I could have done that about 40 years ago. I tried to do that 40 years ago and I was unsuccessful. I think you missed the mark here. I am past the time of you using me in that way. Past that time of calling. He tries to back up on that hineni. Moses said to God in verse 11, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Just the shepherd at this point. Don't have any connections to the Pharaoh anymore. Not fit, not able, getting tired. And people used to want to kill me because I did some stuff in the wrong way back then. God said, I will be with you. This will be the sign to you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. You'll see, because you'll come right back here and worship God with the people after you've brought them out of the mountain. That will be my sign to you. And Moses continues to give excuses. He says how his tongue doesn't work, and God says, well, who's the one that made your tongue? He gives some other excuses as to why he shouldn't be the one to go. But God assures him, I'll provide. You just follow. You go through with your response. And you know that it's not too late for me to use you in my kingdom. Friends, sometimes seasons pass us. We may no longer have the opportunity, if we ever did, to play professional sports, or to be whatever it is on our high school team, or some other thing that younger folks do. Or we may not just have the gifts to do those things in the first place. Not all dreams are able to be fulfilled. We can't necessarily reach everything that we ever say that we want to get to. But if God is calling you, and God is asking you to do something, and it's God that wants you to reach out and to pursue a particular dream, in this case, for Moses to be used to free the Israelites from the Egyptians, then there is never a time that it's too late for him to use you and to work through you. There's never a time that it's too late for him to say, you know, I want to use you to help free this person. I want to use you to help minister to this person. I want to use you to be light to this person. And we might say, yeah, I'm not as energetic anymore. My tongue doesn't work that well. I don't know enough of your word, Lord, to even know when to begin. But if God says, no, I want to use you, and we've responded to God, here I am, Lord, we need to trust that God will provide, that it's not too late, that we can enter into the game, and that it's even more important than being a major league pitcher, as awesome as that is and was for Jim Morris. That it's never too late to respond to the call of God in our lives, to give whatever moments we have left to God, and to be willing to be used in his kingdom and for his purposes. And now we know that we've been given an even bigger blessing than Moses, that we have the gift of Christ fulfilled with the filling of the Spirit. And so I encourage you, wherever you are in your walk of faith, to know the story of God, and to also know that it's not too late to respond to his call. I pray that you respond sooner than later. Don't push God off. Don't make excuses. Don't tell God all the reasons why you can't do something. But continue to respond to God and say, hineni, here I am. You know my weaknesses. You know my faults. You know my flaws. You know my stumblings in the past. You know the things that I don't think I can do right now. But here I am. Whatever it is that you want from me, God, I'll trust that you will provide. And won't that be an awesome day when you can gather with those that you've been used to help set free on the mountain of God and worship him? I pray that you continue to respond to the Lord in that way, for your sake and for the glory of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen.